Cairo, Seattle.
Headline, Cyborg struggling to make weight.
Not shocking.
Not at all.
This is going to be one of the enduring. I'll be interested to see if she is a promotable fighter for the UFC. She's fighting on Saturday, UFC Fight Night. She's a dominant fighter, but she's heavier than most women, and there's a lot of questions about her. She's been popped for PEDs once already, right?
Yep. She's tested dirty, and like everybody else, I made a mistake. I didn't realize what I was doing, blah, blah, blah. I mean, listen, she's been under suspicion for a long time. She's a big girl. She's a big, muscular, powerful woman. And her cutting, you hear rumor, who knows what's true, what's not, but I hear she's walking around in the 180s.
No way.
Yeah. She's a muscled, well-muscled woman. So her cutting to 40, which is a catchweight.
Right.
It's a division that does not exist in the UFC, but they're making allowances because she's profitable and all of that. She's having a hard time getting. She fights at 45 in Invicta. She's the Invicta champion at 145, and she's cutting to 140 for these catchweight bouts, and she's having trouble there. So if Ronda Rousey is to stick to her word of I'm not moving up, she can meet me at 135. That fight will never happen. It'll never happen. I'll tell you that right now. It's not going to happen.
It's Fight, an MMA podcast. I'm Danny O'Neill along with Bob Stelton. We got Mike Goldberg is going to join us here, our interview today, which is really exciting. I'm excited to see Ronda Rousey fight again. I'd love to see her fight Cyborg. I don't know if that will really happen. And I would say that my enthusiasm for female fighting is something that kind of caught me by surprise. I did not think when I started watching MMA that is something that I would want to watch.
I think you're in the majority for a lot of people. I think we watched female boxing and it wasn't great. You know what I mean? Because you had Christy Martin, who was a star, the coal miner's daughter, and she was like the star. And you had Lucia Riker out there, who nobody wanted to fight. And then outside of that, you had Layla Ali and Jackie Frazier, and it wasn't an extremely talented group of women, right? And it wasn't that entertaining. And I think some people had a taste of that and went, and then when you thought about women in MMA, you sort of had the same vibe. But then there's the group of people that also look at it and say, I don't want to see women beating each other up.
There was part of that, and I don't think we know all of the different biases that we have. I like to think of myself as a pretty well-rounded person. I really like women's tennis. I like watching women's tennis more than I like watching men's tennis. I think it's more competitive. At the same time, I'm not a WNBA fan. I love the NBA. I think the WNBA is much more fundamentally sound, but it's not. I don't know if it's because I compare it to men's basketball. I don't know if it's because I've got some sort of latent sort of disregard for. I don't like it as much on a visceral level, and I thought that maybe it was going to be because I didn't want to see women punch each other. I thought maybe I hadn't thought of the female boxing part, but that might be true. And then I started watching it, and I think in some ways I mirror a lot of fans. I think women's MMA is awesome.
Well, you're not alone. Dana White was in your camp.
Correct.
Dana White at one point said there will never be women fighting in the UFC. Never. Never. And now his biggest star is a female in Ronda Rousey. You could argue Conor, Ronda, but, I mean, and he's done a complete 180, obviously. And the women, it doesn't even matter whether it's Ronda Rousey, Miesha Tate, Holly Holm, whoever, Amanda Nunes. It's a rarity that you find a dud female fight.
I know.
It's a rarity.
Why is that?
I don't know. I don't have a clear answer other than they just seem to always go for it.
Yeah.
And there's little regard for their own safety. You know what I mean? You'll see guys kind of go out there and feel each other out, and they're establishing distance, and they're kind of a little reluctant at times to engage. It takes a while. You've seen that a million times, right? I don't know that I've seen that with women. Ronda, during her run, her fights are ending in 14 seconds, 37 seconds. They're rushing to meet each other in the middle of the cage, and it's bam, 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 snap, tap, it's over, whatever the ending is. And that seems to be true or consistent amongst all the females. They just go for it. They absolutely go for it. So it is, to me, even if I don't know the two girls, I'm entertained.
Yeah, Nunez is a great. I haven't followed it as much as I followed some of the men's promotions, so I don't know all of the up-and-coming fighters. But watching her when she won the title and just destroyed Misha, who I think Misha's really, really competitive, and I love how tough she is. She's not my favorite style of fighter, but Nunez, who I didn't really know, it was an awesome fight. I mean, she was maybe it is that women just go for it, because at first it was Rousey. And I'm a huge. I love Rousey's story. I love her attitude. There's so many different things I like about it. I don't like her boyfriend.
Again, you're in the majority.
Not a huge fan of her boyfriend, Travis Brown. But really seeing, and women's fighting, it's not just her, though. I love most women's fights. The Ultimate Fighter, where it was Claudia and Mrs. Consonants.
Oh, yeah.
Joanna.
Joanna Jędrzejczyk.
Yeah, I'm not going to try the last name. I'm just going to call it Consonants.
A beast.
She is. She's an awesome fighter. I mean, she's got a little difficulty with the personality skills.
Yeah.
She doesn't have the best people skills. An awesome fighter.
She's an extreme, and that's the other thing is I think in the beginning you saw sort of a lack of talent across the board. There were a couple of standouts, and Ronda was one of them, and Misha was one of them, but you didn't have that. The talent level for the women has come so far. They are so good now. They are just as good as the men. You don't have as many weight divisions for them, so it's a smaller group, but they are just as talented as the men. You've got men. I mean, Misha, I look at and say, well, she's not an elite fighter in terms of her. She's not an elite striker. She's a gritty, tough as nails gamer. Yes. She's a great wrestler. Her stand-up's so-so. Her defense is horrible. She blocks everything with her face. She always has. You saw it in the Nunez fight.
She got lit up in the Nunez fight.
She did it. She does it against everybody, and she is not afraid of it. She gets mad if you stop it. She gets mad. There's blood everywhere. Her nose is pointed the wrong direction. She's like, what are you doing stopping this fight? What are you doing? I'm fine. So she's incredibly entertaining to watch. Incredibly entertaining. But you look at Nunez as incredibly talented. Cyborg is a monster. I mean, she strikes. She's the best striker amongst the females that I've seen, period, end of story. There's nobody that even approaches her striking ability. Jędrzejczyk is a great striker as well, but the power that Cyborg brings with her, she's devastating. I have yet to see her on the ground. She's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu brown belt, so she's very proficient on the ground. Have yet to really see what her ground game even looks like, because she just beats the daylights. She charges. She goes right in and imposes her will, and it's just absolute Armageddon in there as soon as the bell rings.
Do you want to see her fight Rousey? Would you want to see that fight?
Yeah, I would. I would to see if Rousey's on her A game and she's not foolish enough to stand there and try to prove that I can strike with this woman. That would be an interesting fight to see if she were able to get her to the mat. And all right, who's gonna break here? Because that's Rousey's world right there. Once that fight goes to the ground, that's her world. But at the same time, Cyborg's sort of an unproven commodity on the ground. I haven't really seen her do anything. I hear about it. I hear about her training, and I hear how proficient she is in jiu-jitsu and all of these things. We just don't see it because she goes out there and just pounds the daylights out of people.
I watched the home Rousey fight again this week.
Terrible.
Yeah.
There was zero plan. There was zero game plan.
It was a terrible approach. It looked like I don't think she wanted to prove a point. I think she wanted to keep there from ever being distance with Holm, which is why she kind of chased after her like she did. But it was an awful game plan. And then when it started going bad, she didn't adjust at all. In fact, she intensified the approach that was getting her just clobbered.
Yeah, it was terrible. It looked like her plan was overwhelm her. She's not going to be able to handle the moment where they were in Australia. There were 50,000 people there. So I think she thought perhaps she would buckle under the pressure of that moment. And I sort of get it on one level because Holm didn't look good in her first two fights. She had 2 UFC fights before that and looked really, really mediocre. She won, but she didn't dazzle by any stretch. You kind of went, ugh. This seems early, and that was the prevailing thought. This is a little early to throw her in there with Ronda. This almost doesn't feel fair. I thought Ronda was going to tear her apart, and we saw what happened. But she didn't seem to have a game plan for. There was no plan B. If plan A doesn't work, what do I do? I think she just thought, I'm going to run this girl over. She's just not ready for this. She's not ready for the spotlight, and she went in there, and she didn't look to be in the best shape she's been. She looked a little loose physically. Edmund, I think, is a terrible trainer, had 0 for her. 0 in the court. You're doing great. She's halfway unconscious, Ed. What are you talking about? I understand you want to try to, keep their spirits up or encourage them when she's getting her butt kicked, but Give her some direction. Hey, how about circling to your left? Circle away from that kick. Or how about keep your hands up, your chin down. Let me see you pop the jab and then go for the single or go for the – give her some instruction other than, you're doing great out there. You're doing great. It was the worst corner work I've seen.
Does anyone like Edmund?
I don't think so, except for Travis Brown and Ronda Rousey.
I'll be interested to see about Travis Brown after because Edmund gets into it, and I can't – I always think his last name's Targaryen now.
Tarvardian?
Yeah, because of Game of Thrones.
Yeah,
I'm never
Targaryens.
I'm never gonna be able to get Tarvadian because I'm just always gonna think of him as a Targaryen, even though he's doesn't have the purple eyes that they're supposed to have.
Rhonda's mom hates him.
Yeah,
hates him.
Yeah, she openly calls for her daughter to fire him
publicly. Every interview she does, she tears him a new one. Talks about it. He's a vulture. He's a buzzard. He doesn't. Yeah, she can't stand him. I love it.
And the last time, most recently, Edmund Targaryen was seen getting kicked in the chest. Getting kicked in the chest by Fabricio Verdun.
Yeah. He came charging out there, cursing at Fabricio after he beat up Travis Brown. And I'm not even sure what his issue was. I don't really know if he thought he was – because you remember after that fight, the crowd was kind of booing a little bit, and Fabricio was looking at the crowd like, well, like rubbing his eyes like he's crying.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Edmund thought he was doing that to Travis or what he thought, but he was cursing him up and down and getting really aggressive with him. And my only hope was that Verdun was going to follow with a right hand or something after the push kick.
See, now it's funny because if that happened to anybody else, if that was anybody else in the cage after the fight, we would have this big thing. Oh my gosh, fighter assaults someone. Yeah. But because no one likes Edmund, everybody's like, yeah, he didn't kick him that hard.
Yeah, it was a push kick. It was just to get distance. And that was Fabricio's excuse, by the way. He said, hey, he's a boxer. I knew he wanted to punch my face.
So I pushed him away with my foot, and everybody's, it's cool, man. That dude had that coming probably.
You know what was funny is if you watch Travis in that whole scrum, he kind of stood there like, what the hell's going on? And then sort of struck a pose like, okay, I'm ready. I'm thinking, this guy just tuned you up, man.
Yeah, I know.
You don't want any more of this. Yeah. Don't act like you're ready to throw down again because he just worked you.
And that's the part of it where it's like, is that really going to be a deterrent? Like you standing in front of, I'm going to defend my trainer. Like, yeah, he's going to beat you for the second time tonight.
I think he was going to defend his trainer against maybe Fabricio's trainers. No, Edmund, you handle Fabricio. I'll take care of his trainers because I just went 3 rounds with him and it didn't go so well.
All right, we tried to get Chael Sonnen. I tried. We've got the fishing lines out. It will happen at some point. Instead, we have Chael via audio, and he also returned to the cage with Bellator over the weekend.
Mm-hmm.
Before we talk about his return, let's give you a sample of a couple of Chael's greatest hits. Here he is talking about his difficulty with Brazil.
I picked my medium very carefully when I talked about Brazil. I went to the internet. And if I had the foggiest idea that they had computers in Brazil, I wouldn't have done that. I really didn't know. I was in Las Vegas when the Nogueira brothers first touched down in America. There was a bus this is a true story. There was a bus that pulled up to a red light, and Little Nog tried to feed it a carrot while Big Nog was petting it. He thought it was a horse. This really happened. Do you believe me that happened?
Not really.
He tried to feed a bus a carrot, and now you're telling me that country has computers? I didn't know that. I did not know that.
This is him. That's after he returned, and I should set the stage. Ariel Helwani did the interview, and it's shot in black and white. They're sitting there. Chael's got a drink with him. It's kind of like this lounge interview. It's when he returned from his suspension after the first Anderson Silva fight.
Right.
So he returns and he talks about, and this is when he's basically waging war with all of Brazil. Ariel asks him who he wants to fight. He said, I need an easy fight to get back in. Give me a Silva. Anderson Silva, Wanderlei Silva, Bigfoot Silva. Just give me a Silva.
He's the best. I love him. I get that he's polarizing and people hate him. I love him. I think he's incredibly clever. He's a smart guy. He's very smart. He's been able to market himself with, I don't want to say limited skills. He's also a guy I would say he's not an elite fighter.
Yeah, that's probably very fair. He was an elite college wrestler.
He's an elite college wrestler, but he's not a great stand-up fighter. He's never the guy that everybody looked at and went, whoa, watch out, Chael's coming. I mean, he had this brilliant moment. We talked about it with Anderson Silva, and he was seconds away from pulling off one of the biggest upsets ever. After that, you kind of saw who he was. When you saw him fight John Jones, you saw him fight Rashad Evans, you saw him in the rematch with Silva. I mean, he's an incredibly entertaining, smart guy who's very good. Anybody fighting at this level is very good, but he's not in that George St. Pierre, that John Jones, that Anderson. So all of those guys, it's just a different level that he was never in. But he talked his way into those situations, and I give him all the credit in the world. And
he returned to Bellator.
Yeah.
In what was, even by Chael's standards, a very, I don't know if it's provocative, if it was sort of a confrontational to the audience return.
Yeah, it was uncomfortable. It really was, because I made it a point to watch. They were promoting, hey, coming up, big news surrounding Chael, and we knew he had signed and all that, and we're going to be talking to him, so stay tuned. So I'm like, okay, this will be fun. And he was in his mode. He was in promotion mode, and I think everybody at this point is aware he and his wife had a child that just passed away, and I'm not sure what happened, but it was a young child. Obviously incredibly devastating, and a lot of people feeling really awful about it, and so he came on and said, and seemed very sincere, sort of, he wasn't all amped and animated. He was like, hey, I just want all of you to know a lot has happened over the past few months, and I'm paraphrasing here, and I've received your letters and your emails and your texts, and I've read them all. I've read each and every one of them. I just want you to know, this, and then he just comes out with, I haven't thought about any one of you for 1 second. I'm here just to take money out of your pocket, and the bad guy is bad. I'm like, whoa. I mean, he just flipped the switch right there, and even for him, that was jarring. That was shocking. I was like, okay, he's back, I guess. I didn't know how to take that. It was really sort of uncomfortable.
But I agree with you, but there's also, I'm able to look at Chael, and maybe it's just because of how I know how well he understands marketing, and say what he's doing is he's taken someone like me or you who really likes him and likes the show, and he's going to make even us uncomfortable. He's not going to leave everyone out. I'm not going to come out here and be your show pony. I'm going to make everybody have a reaction where if he came out and just talked about Brazil and computers, we would all like, oh, Chael's really witty and he's really funny. And he kind of moves you in a way of, you're like, wow. Even when you get it, he's going to push you to the edge.
Yeah, he's back. He's back is all I could say. I'm a big fan of him. I think what he does is hilarious. I think it's smart, and I get it. And even I was sort of taken aback, whoa, wow, did he just use that as part of his shtick? You know what I mean? It was like, I don't know how you find anything worse, yet it's his situation. He's free to talk about it in any way he wants to. I was just a little surprised. It was he said he lured everybody in with the somber sort of talk and very genuine, sincere, and I've read them all, and I just want you all to know. And you figured, hey, just appreciate it. I figured something like that was coming. You helped me through a tough time. No. Haven't thought about any of you, and I'm here just to take money out of your pocket.
He set the hook. We are going to have more sound from Chael, but next we're going to get in the cage with Mike Goldberg. It's brought to you by Emerald Queen Casino. We're here with Mike Goldberg, announcer for the UFC, and someone who I'm really excited to talk about here on Fight and MMA Podcast. Mike, thank you so much for taking the time.
Danny, it's my pleasure. Anytime.
I'm one of the people I consider myself kind of this generation of UFC fans who started watching with The Ultimate Fighter now about 10 years ago. You've been involved with the promotion for so long. And what I was curious, your perspective, you've probably got a really unique viewpoint for how the sport has grown. Did you ever imagine when you started calling fights that you would have this kind of promotion that you're now the lead voice for?
Absolutely, 100%. Not a chance. Not a chance in the world, Danny. When, guys, and Bob, you know this, when I started Ultimate Japan, we were already in the dark days. Mm-hmm. Senator McCain had already called, Ultimate Fighting or MMA at that point, but really it was the Ultimate Fighting Championship, Cuban cockfighting. It had already been taken off of cable television. in the United States. And a lot of us who have satellite TV, we think everybody does. Well, that's not the truth. And it certainly wasn't the case back in 1997. So there were limited households which could even make that decision, Danny, to buy the pay-per-view or not. And I always say Canada saved the Ultimate Fighting Championship back in the day because they were pressing that red button to buy. We were still somewhat of a spectacle. It was getting more towards mainstream when I came in at Ultimate Japan, but we were in little places like Bay St. Louis, Mississippi, and I don't even know where we were. Uncasville, Connecticut. We were in places that allowed us to be there. And there was this whole regulation thing where we were just trying to get to a place where we could put on a show and get it on pay-per-view and hopefully get some buys. There's a story, and I've shared this with you before, Bob, that we had this show in New Orleans. It was in New Orleans, and we had this great open and Bourbon Street. We weren't in New Orleans. We were in Kenner, Louisiana. And back then, if people wanted tickets, I did have a handful of tickets to give out. So there were definitely days back then. Really, it was each show, Danny, where we would show up because it's a bunch of guys from ESPN Hockey on our crew, and that's how I ended up getting the gig, going, man, we should have fun this weekend because this is probably going to be the last one.
Man. And then you fast forward to now, Goldie. The company sells for $4.2 billion, and New York has finally given the okay. All right, even though, amateur MMA was fine in the state, now you can fight legally as a professional out there. What's left to tackle for the sport? Because it has crossed over into the mainstream on a lot of levels with athletes like Conor McGregor, like Ronda Rousey. People are aware of who they are, whether they've watched them fight or not. So it has they've been able to transcend the sport. What do you think the next step is to bring it, I guess, to even a higher platform?
Well, the real, turning point, and Danny, you mentioned the Ultimate Fighter, was when the new ownership came in, they embraced regulation. They didn't run from it. And perhaps the most significant hire in UFC history is Mark Ratner, who was for a very long time the head of the Nevada State Athletic Commission. And Mark went state to state. We had the unified rules of mixed martial arts, and New York was the last one to buy in. But New York as a state knew that we were good to go. There were other things that they wanted to fight over, and now, thankfully, we are going to be in, the greatest arena in North America, Madison Square Garden, the world's most famous arena. What's left, Bob, I think, is the continuation of global domination. And that is something that Lorenzo Fertitta really embraced when he came over years ago from working Palace Station casinos with his brother Frank. Of course, that was the family business and continues to be the family business. But there came a time where Lorenzo was, 5 a.m. to 3 p.m. at Station Casinos and then 3 p.m. to midnight at the UFC, and he put the Station Casinos aside for a moment, came full-time to Zuffa, and that was what Lorenzo was about, was the rest of the world is interested in a fight, unlike NFL Europe, which never made it. Unlike other sports that could go around the world and not make it. Soccer, for example, not as big here as it is in other countries around the world. So it's the continuation of this global domination, if you will, and making new superstars and turning some of these potentially great fighters and future great champions into the next set of Conor McGregors or Ronda Rouseys or whoever, Anderson Silva, whoever might be the big stars, George St. Pierre. We want to have more of those guys and those women who are really, when they fight, are really a marquee event.
It's interesting. Bob brings up kind of the expansion of the sport, and you're talking about that, Goldie, because women's MMA, and we started the show talking about this, I did not think that was going to be something I liked. And I just, whether it was the sort of the appearance of women hitting each other, the competition Bob brought up, female boxing, women's boxing was never really embraced, or it's just not a great product yet. I find myself, I am a huge fan of women's mixed martial arts. They're great fights.
They leave it all in the octagon. And, if you talk to, let's say you talk to a collegiate coach and talk to the men's volleyball coach, and then talk to the women's volleyball coach. And obviously, there are a world of difference between coaching men and coaching women. But the one thing the women always seem to have is this different level of natural compete, natural battle, and that's what they bring into the octagon. Hey, Danny, I have a 19-year-old daughter who I never, ever want to see in a fight of any time. Never, ever, ever do I want to see my daughter in a fight. But these women take it seriously. They compete properly. And I can put this all into a little nutshell for you. Paige Van Zandt, that crazy kick that she used to earn the victory in her last fight. She turns in this great performance, beats Joanne Calderwood after being on Dancing with the Stars. I come in after the show, go into the dressing room to get changed and leave, and she's in the dressing room getting a little makeup on before she goes to the press conference. And I said, wow, Paige, that was unbelievable. And she started talking about it, very humble. She's a 22-year-old girl. She's a little kid in a big girl sport and turning in highlight reel knockouts. So these women love it. And Paige said it was interesting because, you know, Paige was a lifelong dancer. Her parents own a dance studio that while she was on Dancing with the Stars, she missed that next level of competition that mixed martial artists, you know, experience every day in training.
You know, Goldie, you hit on the one thing I was telling Danny as far as why I think there's an appeal to women fighting, and that is that they do leave it all in there. It seems like there'll be fights out there with guys. They'll go through a feeling out process, whether it's a half a round or a round where they're kind of trying to find the distance. They're circling. They're not engaging much. I mean, you've seen it a million times. The crowd will boo. I can't think of a women's fight where that's happened. They just seem to charge out there and with little regard for their own safety, whether it's Misha Tate or anybody else, they just go for it. And to me, that's sort of what has been able to win people over, and the skill level has risen to the point where I think they're on par with the men. I don't think there's a huge gap, even though it's a smaller group. You know, you don't have as many weight divisions for the women. The gap in talent has absolutely closed, and it's a rarity that you see a dull fight between two women.
I absolutely agree, Bob. And again, if you want to make an analogy, you know, look at the PGA Tour and look at the LPGA Tour. And the one thing, I was a big Nancy Lopez fan back in the day. And the real difference between those golfers is that the men could muscle things. They could pick up for little errors by turning the hips at the last moment or turning over the hands. What did the women have? An absolutely picturesque, perfect golf swing, perfect technique, beautiful to watch. If you wanted to be a golfer, you wanted that slow backswing of the Hall of Famer Nancy Lopez. And that's how these women train. They train to be perfect at the technique and then to utilize the muscle, where the guys can muscle through some things and work through some technique, I would say deficiencies, not big ones, Bob and Danny, but they can power through some things that the women can't, which I believe makes the women that much sharper in their overall skill set.
You mentioned, Mike, you mentioned the Fertitta brothers, and I think that all MMA fans really owe a debt of gratitude to them for what they did with the sport, how they were fight fans, a lot of things that go into the UFC. It has been sold. Dana's still going to be involved. Do you think anything changes in the promotion going forward? What have you seen?
Well, you know, I think that if you pay, you know, that much money for something, it isn't broken. You're there to fine-tune. You're there to grow. And you're there to go back on a previous statement, Danny, that to make more of our fighters mainstream superstars. And that is what, you know, William Morris has been doing for years and years. They have the biggest talent at, you know, at William Morris and IMG now. And they've taken those mega superstars and made them even bigger superstars and global phenomenons. And that is where the strength of our new ownership is. And they have great relationships with all these arenas and venues around the world. And, you know, Lorenzo Fertitta, like I said, he was putting us in a lot of great places. And I believe the new ownership is just going to take what Lorenzo has already set up and take it, make it work, and then go up a rung, and then another, and move up the ladder. And I just believe it's going to be fine-tuned. I believe I don't think you're going to see any major, like, wow, that just changed. But I think if you sit back, let's say 6 months or a year from now, and you go, wow, they're doing that every show now, I think that's the difference you're going to see with the new ownership.
Hey, Mike, what was your reaction to the CM Punk fight? I've seen a lot of people on both sides of this, and to me, I looked at it and I watched some of the training video that was out there, and I know it was really limited, but to me, it was a very predictable outcome, and I'm guessing you might have felt the same way. I don't know that it was necessarily a bad thing for the sport. I don't know that he should fight in the UFC again until he gets something, some experience under his belt, but you see people on both sides. It seems a very polarizing topic in that it was bad, made the UFC look bad. They don't do, freak show fights. That's a Bellator thing, and people looked at it as sort of a freak show fight. I give the guy a world of credit for doing what he did. He took his time training. It takes an incredible amount of courage to step through that cage door there. I don't care who you are. So I have a lot of respect for what he did. At the same time, I kind of get where people said it never should have happened. It wasn't fair to him, even though he made $500,000. What was your take on that?
Well, I'll tell you, I think you just described it perfectly, Bob, is that he took it seriously and he took the time to try to train properly. It was a far cry from Randy Couture, James Toney,
right,
where the dude walked in and that was that. CM Punk, and I talked to him the day before, the dude's a laid-back guy. He's very likable, very respectful coming into this sport, wanting to challenge himself, and took a beating. I mean, he could have given up his back and tapped way earlier than he did, but he took a beating in there. And so it's good for the UFC and mixed martial arts because you see that a rookie, not just CM Punk, a superstar, but a rookie of all kinds can come in and compete at the highest level. And Mickey Gall, his Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu is for real. I mean, this kid is a prospect, a true talented prospect. To a certain point, I'm disappointed, not in the fight, but I kind of was rooting for CM Punk. And Danny, I was rooting for him because of the respect that he was showing the sport, that he was showing other UFC fighters, because Duke Rufus said, you're going to train at least for a year before you get in there and fight. And it ended up being close to 2 years. So I was disappointed that Punk didn't have a better showing, win or lose, just have a better showing. Maybe he's a decent striker, but we didn't get to see that. Because, again, I have respect, like you were saying, Bob, that he was attempting to do it right. It wasn't a freak show. I mean, when Brock came in early, Brock utilized his collegiate wrestling skills to become a UFC champion. But Brock's striking never evolved. We never really saw Brock strike, stand, and throw a kick. CM Punk, I believe, has those skills. It's just hard to showcase them when Mickey Gall puts you on your back 30 seconds into the fight.
Hey, Mike, before we let you go, I want to get a quick thought. Cyborg will be fighting this weekend. I'm reading story, and it's always the dream match. Is she ever going to fight Ronda Rousey, all of that? But, I'm reading, and she was talking about how she's having trouble losing weight. When she was doing an interview on Monday, she said she's at 165 pounds. And this is with her training. She's cutting to 140, and I look at that and say, all right, she's at 165 a week before the weigh-in. The idea of her ever meeting Ronda at 135 to me seems about as impossible as anything I can imagine. I just don't think it's physically possible for her to get to 135 if she's having this much trouble getting to 140. What do you think?
Well, here's what I think. I think that Cyborg is truly the most dangerous female fighter in the world. I mean, this woman does nothing but destroy her opponents. Cyborg is on a different level when it comes to aggressiveness, and not just aggressiveness because we talked about that earlier, Danny. Bethe Correia is pretty aggressive too, but she doesn't have 1/10 of the skill set of Cyborg. In this day and age, with dietitians, with everything that is available to live your life a certain way every single day and cut back on whatever it is and utilize proper supplements, proper techniques with your strength and conditioning coach, if she can get to 140, she can get to 135. And if she can get to 135, there are millions and millions of dollars that she can make. And to me, that should be her incentive, not just the finances, but to truly be a UFC champion. She needs to get to 135. But if she's getting to 140, don't come in a week out at 165. That's unheard of. Our guys are not doing that anymore, Bob, because there's no more IVs and you have to weigh in each day of the week. And now keep in mind, the weigh-ins are in the mornings on Friday, so you have more recovery before you actually fight. I think if Chris Cyborg can step on the scale at 140, even if it's for 2 minutes and she balloons right back up, she can step on the scale at 135 and have a legitimate chance to be a UFC champion.
He is Mike
And I would love to see it, and I'd love to call the fight.
Yeah, I think we'd all love to see it. He is Mike Goldberg. Goldie, you've been a great friend to Bob through the years, and first time getting a chance to interview, I love the way you call. I love the energy you bring to the UFC, and it's really, really kind of a cool moment for me to get to talk to you, so we really appreciate the time.
Wow, the feeling is mutual, Danny. Keep him in shape. Don't let him tell you that DeMarco Farr is his best friend because DeMarco's my best friend, and so don't believe everything that Bob tells you, Danny.
All right, that sounds good. Goldie, thanks so much.
Goldie, we appreciate you, brother.
Yeah.
You're the best, man.
Thanks, man.
Anytime. Danny, nice to talk to you, my friend.
Nice to talk to you, Mike.
See you guys.
Take care.
Bye.
Has Goldberg always been that nice?
He's awesome.
He's like the sweetest guy.
He is. He's the best. And I just love that, first of all, and he's like that with everybody. I've just watched him interact with fans and all of that. And he's so gracious with his time, and he loves the sport, and he loves talking about the sport with people who love the sport.
It's interesting because he has become the voice, and he did mention at the Ultimate Japan, which for a long time, that was like getting video of that fight, because I believe that's the card where Tito Ortiz fights Frank Shamrock, if I'm remembering correctly. You couldn't find footage from it. You couldn't. It was square in the dark ages of the sport, and then they're bouncing around Tunica. If that's how you pronounce it?
Yeah.
They were basically on casinos and Indian reservations because no one would actually sanction the bouts.
Yeah,
and
Uncasville, and
yeah,
I like how he said, we're in New Orleans. We weren't in New Orleans. They were in Louisiana.
Yeah.
They weren't in New Orleans.
Yeah, all the different things. And now you think about it, I mean, it's going to have a card in November in Madison Square Garden, and what the sport has become. It's really, it's amazing. And it's probably testament in some ways to the love people have developed for the sport, people like Mike Goldberg.
Well, and you see the pay-per-view numbers, and you see like the last Diaz-McGregor pay-per-view did like 1.69 million. The record in boxing for the longest time was 2.2, which was De La Hoya and Floyd Mayweather. So MMA has come a long, long way in terms of some of the biggest. It's exceeded WWE pay-per-view, most boxing pay-per-views. I mean, it's become a big. It's still, I guess, a niche sport on a lot of levels, but it's transcended with the fighters we talked about, like McGregor and Rousey being on the cover of Sports Illustrated and being in national ad campaigns, and so they've sort of transcended the sport. People know who they are, and it's fun and interesting to see how big it's become. Right, the awareness of it, the awareness of the fighters in particular. Even if somebody's not a fight fan, they go, "Oh yeah, I know who Conor McGregor, I know who Ronda Rousey is, I know who John Jones is." So it's interesting to see it grow on that level. Okay,
you want to hear more Chael?
Yes.
Okay. We're gonna go with this. Is now I should give a disclaimer because there's a little bit of homophobia in this one. It's not egregious, but at the same time it's kind of like I don't like that part of this. Still, it's exceptionally funny when he's talking about the specific style of jiu-jitsu. Now he's got a rivalry, and it's still going with Wanderlei Silva.
Yeah,
and he's called him all sorts of names. Constantly calls him Big Dummy, and when Wanderlei said to Ariel Helwani, I'm going to kill him and kill him quick. And then this was Chael's response.
Wanderlei, you are an immigrant from Brazil. I am a gangster from America. Are you sure you want to play that game with me? Listen, Vandalay, I will do a home invasion on you. I will cut the power to your house, and the next thing you hear will be me climbing up your stairs in a pair of night vision goggles I bought in the back of Soldier of Fortune magazine. I'll pick the lock to the master room door, take a picture of you in bed with the Nogueira brothers working on your jiu-jitsu. I'll take said photograph, post it at www.dorksfrombrazil.com. Password, not required. Username, not required. That, Vandalay, is how you threaten somebody, dummy.
And
I forgot how much I love that guy. That is hilarious.
Yeah, it's really funny.
Do you think that's off the cuff? Do you think he comes prepared? He's in his hotel room or wherever he's at before he's conducting this interview going, okay.
No, I think he's got an idea about what he's going to say. I think the performance part of it, I think he adds things to it as he's going. I think like
just the climbing the stairs, the pick the lock, the night vision goggles I bought in the back of Soldier of Fortune magazine.
Dorksfrombrazil.com.
Password not required.
And the whole thing. And you can realize, like, if you were a fighter, because it's not like he doesn't take the craft of fighting seriously.
Right.
And it's also almost like he's not a super exciting fighter. He's a wrestler.
Yeah.
He's a ground and pound. That is a boring style of fight to most people. I like it. And I think I can appreciate that. But it's like he's counterbalanced that with this extreme identity. He calls himself a gangster from Oregon. He grew up in West Lynn.
I've never been there, but I've never heard of it being on the top 10 most dangerous list.
It's a suburb. It's a suburb of Portland. It's an affluent suburb of Portland. He refers to himself as a gangster from West Lynn.
Love it. I love Chael.
All right, here's now. This gets into, because his rivalry with Silva ties back to how Chael views the Pride promotion, which is something that it's a defunct promotion. Now, the UFC bought it and they have their tape library, but it was 10 years ago, Pride was a bigger promotion than the UFC. And it's based in Japan. There are all sorts of ties to the Yakuza. All sorts of different things happen there. But there were Wanderlei Silva became a star there. Rampage Jackson became a star there. Fedor Emelianenko was at the time basically considered the most dominant fighter in the world. He was in that promotion. In retrospect, there's some questions about the legitimacy of it, and he gets into that when he's talking about Pride here.
Vandelay's going to go 22 straight wins in Japan, and he can't win 2 straight in America. Mirko Cro Cop's going to win all those fights in Japan. He can't beat anybody in America. Fedor's going to win all those fights in Japan, and he's 3-2 in America, and one of those wins is over a guy that was flipping tires at Sam's Club the month before. Who's the latest guy? Yamamoto. Kid Yamamoto. 10 years they told us this is the greatest featherweight to ever live. He can't win a round in the UFC, let alone a fight. The only fighter to ever, from Japan, the only Japanese fighter to ever cut it in the U.S. is Yushin Okami, and he's the only fighter to never go through the Japanese circuit. The Japanese circuit is fake. It's always been fake. None of those guys won those fights. They never won those fights. Wanderlei Silva, 22-0. Mirko Cro Cop, one leg cemetery, one leg, whatever. Well, what happened, Mirko? What happened to your legs? Nothing happened. The referee's not wearing an earpiece. The promoter didn't come in the back and tell your opponent when to go down. That's what happened. I lost my motivation. No, you didn't. You suck. You suck just like Fedor sucks. You suck just like Wanderlei sucks.
He's not wrong.
I know. It's funny when he's pulling out the records. I mean, you're 22-0 there, and you can't win 3 here, and you're.
And anytime you go down this rabbit hole, because it becomes, look, Wanderlei Silva is a great fighter, and he's really competitive and he's fun to watch. But you can't take the records over in Japan at face value when you compare what happened when all those guys got in the UFC. It's not like they're incompetent fighters. It's just that nobody wins 22 straight fights fighting against elite competition.
Mm-hmm. Unless you're John Jones.
Yeah, that's true. It makes what Jones and to a lesser extent St. Pierre have done, because St. Pierre does have a loss to Sarah.
Yeah, and Matt Hughes.
And he's had competitive fights. Yeah, the first he took that fight on late notice, though.
Yeah.
I think if they stopped that fight when Hughes submitted him and they started it again, St. Pierre would have destroyed him.
I tend to agree. I mean, nobody goes through their career, if they've got a career of any length, undefeated. It just doesn't happen. I mean, Jones is the only guy right now who's undefeated. He's got a loss, but it was a disqualification against Matt Hamill, who he was absolutely torturing at the time, and threw an illegal elbow, and it became a DQ.
Why are those elbows illegal?
It's just the angle that is coming down 12-6 straight down.
Is it because it looks bad? It doesn't seem like. So it's the point of the elbow. You can't. It can't be a vertical.
12-6.
Right. You can't hit him with a vertical.
And maybe they
elbow.
feel like it's too much. It could be too damaging. Whereas if you come at an angle, you can't get quite the. I'm not entirely sure.
It's a weird rule to me.
If it's the aesthetics or if it is the actual damage it can cause.
Because I get. And in Pride, you could soccer kick a guy's head.
Oh, jeez.
There was no kicks to a downed opponent, no knees to a downed opponent. You could just boot him. I get why that's dangerous.
Yeah. I could see why that's not allowed. That makes sense to me. As much as I like sanctioned violence, there has to be a line somewhere.
Yeah, I get that that's not just about we don't like the appearance of somebody booting somebody's noggin when they're on the ground, but the 12-6 elbows always struck me as weird.
Yeah, but I mean, back to the original point, it's nobody goes through undefeated. We just saw McGregor lose. You saw Aldo, who had been undefeated forever. I mean, hadn't lost in forever. Anderson Silva, it doesn't matter. You name it, they go in. If you fight at all for any length of time at all, you're going to lose. That's just the nature of the sport, except for Jones. Ronda Rousey lost.
Yes, she did. She got tuned up. She's still coming back from that. You watched that fight. I said I watched it again. You can tell why she's messed up. She got bludgeoned in that fight.
Yeah, she did. She went Misha Tate. She tried to block everything with her face. It was unbelievable.
Not the best strategy?
No. There was no strategy. I don't know what the game plan was in that fight. I have zero. I would love to sit down with Edmund and her and say, okay, tell me what you were thinking coming in, other than I'm just charging at her and I'm going to try to overwhelm her.
She's doing great. She's doing great.
She did great. You're still conscious. You still see me, right? You're perfect. Got her right where you want her.
All right. Last thing. Do you want to hear one more from Chael?
Yes.
All right. Here is it's him talking about a common household item that was actually invented in Brazil. Here's more of his trash talking. This time it's talking about dental appliances.
So I packed a suitcase full of gifts, full of things from America that they don't have. I'm trying to merge. Yeah, I'm trying to merge the two countries in a way, that maybe we can work together. For example, I bought packets of soap for them. Because I know they don't have it. And I just want to help. And I brought shampoo. And I brought them dental floss. And, speaking of dental floss and dentistry, it's very interesting. This is a true story. Did you know that the toothbrush was actually created in Brazil? Yeah, it's true. Had it been created in America or really anywhere else, it'd be called the teeth brush. But that's the way that happened. And when I get there on Tuesday, I'm going to explain to these guys that I didn't mean to do this. And I'm going to come with gifts and see if we can smooth it over.
I hadn't heard that one. That is gold.
He's insulting an entire country that he's about to go visit.
Oh, I just remember hearing about all of the security detail that needed to be around him when he went there because of all of this talk. And you've got a rabid fan base there, and you are just poking and prodding and saying this kind of stuff, man. That's brave. I don't know if it's stupid or brave or both, but he didn't take his foot off the gas for a second. If he feared for his life or safety, it never showed.
If it was invented anywhere else, it would be called the teeth brush.
Oh, that is hilarious.
Do you think he's just Googling like things invented in Brazil?
And then he just
looks at it and he's like, the toothbrush. Oh, I can work with that.
I would love to know just how much of it is just off the cuff, or how much of it is just, all right, here's what I'm going to say about them petting the bus, thinking it's a horse. Here's what I'm going to say about them. They're sleeping in bed, working on their jiu-jitsu, and he's climbing the walls with his night vision goggles.
Dorksfrombrazil.com.
No password not needed. Not necessary. He's good.
Yeah,
he's good.
We're gonna get him on here. We are gonna get him.
He'll hang
here.
up on us.
Yeah, and it'll be fantastic.
That's how he's always done it.
We couldn't welcome it anymore. We thank you for listening to Fight. We thank Mike Goldberg for joining us, and we look forward to talking to you again next week. Fight and MMA podcast. Danny O'Neill and Bob Scott.
They thought it was a horse, and now you're telling me they have computers in Brazil? That's crazy to me.